My register drawer stuck again when I tried to close it after counting the evening till. Tuesday nights at the only gas station in town were usually dead quiet, which gave me too much time to think about things I'd rather forget. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly white glow that made even fresh coffee look gray. I was wiping down the counter for the third time when I heard the car pull up outside. The engine coughed and wheezed before cutting out completely, followed by the distinct hiss of steam. Through the smudged glass windows, I watched a beat-up sedan settle near Pump 2 with white vapor pouring out from under its hood. The driver's door opened, and a young woman stepped out, maybe mid-20s, with shoulder-length brown hair and the kind of frustrated expression that meant car trouble. She stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, staring at the steam like she could will it to stop. Then she headed for the station entrance. The bell above the door chimed as she walked in, bringing the cool October air with her. She wore jeans and a light jacket, nothing that suggested she knew what kind of place she'd wandered into. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the counter. "My car just overheated out there. Do you have any coolant or maybe know a mechanic who's still open?" I looked past her at the sedan, taking note of the out-of-state plates. Another outsider who'd taken the wrong turn somewhere along Highway 19. They always ended up here eventually, and they never understood what they were walking into. "Where you headed?" I asked, setting down my cleaning rag. "My aunt's house. She lives on Maple Street, but I got turned around on these back roads." She laughed, but it sounded strained. "I'm Emily, by the way. This is my first time visiting, and I guess I picked a bad night for it." Maple Street. I knew exactly where that was, and more importantly, I knew the road she'd have to take to get there. My stomach tightened as I calculated the route in my head. None of it was safe after dark, especially not for someone who didn't know the rules. "Dave Richardson," I said, extending my hand. "Let me check what I've got for coolant." I walked around the counter and headed for the automotive section, but my mind was already working through the problem. Emily followed behind me, her footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum. "This place is pretty isolated," she said, glancing around at the half-empty shelves and outdated promotional posters. "How do you stay in business out here?" "We get by." I grabbed a jug of coolant from the shelf and turned back toward her. "Look, I need to tell you something important. This town has rules that might sound strange, but they keep people safe." Emily raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Rules? When you're driving these roads, especially at night, you need to keep your speed between 40 and 45 miles per hour. Not faster, not slower." I held up a finger as she started to protest. "Second, if your car breaks down, you stay inside it no matter what. Don't get out, don't walk around. Wait for help to come to you." "Okay, that's actually reasonable advice." "Third," I continued, "if you see train tracks and there's a train coming, you turn around immediately. Don't try to beat it across. Fourth, if you hear tapping sounds coming from any house, you follow them. And fifth, stay away from the stream north of town." Emily's expression shifted from polite attention to barely concealed amusement. "Is there a sixth rule?" "Don't enter any of the red houses. There are 3 of them scattered around town, and they're all painted the same shade of red. You'll know them when you see them." She stared at me for a long moment, then broke into a grin. "Are you serious right now? This sounds like something out of a horror movie." "I'm completely serious. Come on." Emily shook her head, still smiling. "You're telling me your town has some kind of supernatural speed limit and magic houses I need to avoid?" The way she said it made my chest tighten. I'd heard that tone before, from my brother Marcus 3 years ago when I'd tried to warn him about driving too fast on Hollow Creek Road. He'd laughed then too, right before he'd pushed his motorcycle up to 60 and disappeared into the tree line. We found pieces of the bike the next morning, but never found Marcus. "I know how it sounds," I said, keeping my voice level, "but people who don't follow the rules tend to go missing around here." Emily's smile faded slightly, but I could see she still wasn't taking it seriously. "Look, I appreciate the local color, but I really just need to get to my aunt's house." Can you point me toward Maple Street?" I studied her face, looking for any sign that the warnings had gotten through. Instead, I saw the same stubborn determination that had gotten my brother killed. Every instinct told me to let her figure it out on her own, but I couldn't live with another person disappearing on my watch. "Tell you what," I said, "let me help you get that coolant in your car, and then I'll lead you to Maple Street in my truck. The roads can be tricky if you don't know them." Relief washed over her features. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you so much." 20 minutes later, we had her sedan running again, the temperature gauge back in the normal range. Emily climbed behind the wheel while I walked over to my pickup truck parked beside the station. The night air felt heavier than usual, thick with the kind of silence that made me check my rearview mirror more often than normal. I pulled out of the parking lot and waited for Emily to follow. In my side mirror, I watched her car fall into line behind me as we turned onto Hollow Creek Road. The speedometer on my dashboard read exactly 42 miles per hour, right in the safe zone that had kept me alive for the past 34 years. For the first few miles, everything went according to plan. Emily maintained a reasonable distance behind me, her headlights steady in my mirror. The road curved through dense patches of oak and pine trees that pressed close to the asphalt, their branches creating a tunnel of darkness that swallowed our headlight beams. Then I noticed her car pulling closer. At first, I thought she was just trying to keep up better, but when I checked my speedometer again, I was still holding steady at 42. Emily, however, was definitely gaining ground. I tapped my brakes gently, hoping she'd get the message and back off. Instead, she swung out into the opposite lane and pulled alongside my truck. Through her passenger window, I could see her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. She was focused intently on the road ahead, completely ignoring my presence. I honked my horn twice and gestured for her to slow down, but she either didn't notice or didn't care. Her speedometer had to be reading at least 55. The sound started as a low rumble somewhere off to our right, deep in the forest that bordered the road. At first, I thought it might be thunder, but the sky was clear. Then it grew louder and more distinct, and my blood turned cold. Something large was crashing through the trees, moving fast and keeping perfect pace with our vehicles. Branches snapped and leaves rustled as whatever it was bulldozed through the undergrowth, never falling behind and never pulling ahead. The noise was too deliberate to be an animal, too coordinated to be random. It sounded like pursuit. I laid on my horn, flashing my high beams at Emily's car, but she was completely focused on the road ahead. The crashing sounds grew louder, more violent, as if multiple creatures had joined the chase through the dense forest. Emily's car pulled further ahead, her taillights growing smaller as she pushed her speed even higher. The crashing sounds doubled in intensity as I pounded my fist against the steering wheel, my horn blaring continuously into the night. My high beams swept across Emily's rear windshield in rapid flashes, but she kept her speed steady around 55, completely oblivious to my desperate signals. Through her back window, I could see her gripping the wheel with both hands, head turned slightly toward the passenger side where the noise was loudest. Whatever was out there had multiplied. The single creature bulldozing through the undergrowth had become a pack, their coordinated movement creating a wall of snapping branches and thundering footsteps that matched our pace perfectly. The sound reminded me of a freight train derailing in slow motion, except it never stopped and it never lost momentum. I pushed my truck harder, the engine protesting as I pulled into the oncoming lane. Emily's sedan was maybe 10 feet ahead when I managed to draw even with her driver's side window. I rolled mine down and leaned across the cab, cold October air whipping through the truck. "Slow down," I shouted, gesturing wildly at my speedometer. "You're going too fast." Emily's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She rolled her window down partway, wind catching her hair and whipping it across her face. "What?" she yelled back. "The speed limit! You broke the speed limit!" I pointed at the forest where the crashing sounds were reaching a fever pitch. "Slow down to 43 right now." Understanding finally clicked in her expression. I watched her foot move to the brake pedal, her sedan gradually losing speed until we were running parallel at a safe 43 miles per hour. For a moment, I thought we might have caught the problem in time. The crashing stopped, not gradually, not with the natural fade-out of animals giving up a chase. It cut off completely, like someone had thrown a switch. The sudden silence felt worse than the noise had, leaving only the hum of our engines and the whisper of wind through the trees. Then I heard movement again, but this time it was different, faster, more deliberate. Instead of crashing through the undergrowth parallel to the road, whatever was out there had changed direction. The sounds were moving perpendicular to our path, cutting through the forest toward some point ahead of us. They were circling around to cut us off. My mind raced through the geography of Hollow Creek Road, trying to remember what lay ahead. There was the intersection with Old Mill Road about 2 miles up, then the railroad crossing another mile past that. If these things knew the area well enough to intercept us, they'd probably head for one of those choke points. I made my decision without thinking it through. The turnoff for Miller Farm Road appeared on my right, marked by a weathered wooden sign that was barely visible in my headlights. I hit my turn signal and swung the wheel hard, my truck's tires squealing as I took the corner faster than I should have. In my rearview mirror, I saw Emily's brake lights flare as she followed my lead, her sedan fishtailing slightly before she regained control. Miller Farm Road was narrower than Hollow Creek, with no painted lines and potholes that hadn't been filled in years. The pavement was cracked and overgrown with weeds along the edges, but it would take us away from whatever was positioning itself ahead on the main road. The downside was that this route would bring us closer to the stream north of town, the one I'd specifically warned Emily to avoid. But closer to the forbidden stream was better than driving straight into an ambush. I fumbled for my phone with one hand while keeping the other steady on the wheel. Emily's number was still in my recent calls from when she'd tried to reach me earlier about directions. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "David." Her voice sounded tinny through the truck's old speakers. "What the hell is happening out here?" "The things in the woods. They're not just following us anymore," I said, checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit. "They're trying to get ahead of us, block the road. That's why I turned." "That's things. What things?" The stress in her voice made it crack slightly. "I heard crashing, but I thought it was just deer or something." "Not deer, and you going 55 triggered them. The speed limit isn't a joke, Emily. When you go too fast, you attract attention from..." A sound cut across our conversation that made my blood freeze. Low and mournful, it started as a distant whistle that grew steadily louder and more distinct. I'd heard that sound before, though never this close to the Miller Farm Road intersection. The phantom train. Emily's sharp intake of breath crackled through the phone speaker. "Is that a train?" "I thought you said, 'Hang up and keep following me,'" I said, ending the call before she could finish her question. Through my windshield, I could see the intersection ahead where Miller Farm Road crossed the old railway tracks. The crossing had been abandoned for over a decade, the rails rusty and overgrown with grass. But tonight, a brilliant white light was approaching from the east. It moved with the steady rhythm of a locomotive, accompanied by the growing wail of its whistle. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw Emily's face illuminated by her dashboard lights. Even from this distance, I could see the color had drained from her cheeks. Her hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel as she stared at the impossible light bearing down on the crossing ahead of us. The whistle grew louder, more insistent, echoing off the trees that lined both sides of the narrow road. There was nowhere to turn around, no side roads or driveways wide enough for our vehicles. We were committed to this path now, with a phantom train approaching the crossing and whatever had been hunting us still somewhere in the darkness behind. I pressed down on the accelerator, hoping we could reach the tracks and cross safely before the train arrived. The speedometer climbed to 48, then 50, but I didn't care about the speed limit anymore. Sometimes survival meant breaking the rules, even if you understood why they existed in the first place. The light ahead grew brighter, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. Emily's sedan stayed close behind me, her headlights reflecting off my rear bumper as we raced toward an intersection that shouldn't have had a working train line. I slammed on my brakes so hard the truck skidded sideways across the cracked pavement. The phantom train's light was maybe 200 yards from the crossing, close enough that I could see the outline of an old-fashioned locomotive that shouldn't have existed. My door was already open before the truck stopped moving completely. Emily's sedan had lurched to a stop behind me, her brake lights painting the road red. Through her windshield, I could see her gripping the steering wheel with both hands, staring at the approaching train like she couldn't process what she was seeing. The whistle grew louder, more insistent, drowning out the sound of our idling engines. I ran to her car and yanked the driver's door open. Emily sat there frozen, her face pale in the dashboard light, mouth slightly open as she watched the impossible locomotive bearing down on us. "We have to move," I said, grabbing her arm. "Right now." She turned toward me, blinking slowly like she was coming out of a trance. "The cars! Leave them." I pulled her out of the seat, her legs unsteady as she stood. "Run!" We sprinted back down Miller Farm Road, away from the crossing and the approaching train. Emily stumbled on the broken pavement, but I caught her elbow and kept us both moving. Behind us, the whistle reached a deafening pitch that made my ears ring. The light grew so bright it cast our shadows ahead of us on the road, stark and black against the pale asphalt. Then came the sound of metal grinding against metal, a horrible shrieking that seemed to go on forever. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the phantom locomotive passing directly through our abandoned vehicles without slowing down. The train looked solid enough, but it moved through steel and glass like they were made of fog. My truck and Emily's sedan sat untouched on the road, their engines still running, headlights still cutting through the darkness. Emily saw it too and stopped running. She bent over, hands on her knees, breathing hard. What the hell was that? How did it... The whistle faded as the phantom train continued east, taking its impossible light with it. Our vehicles sat exactly where we'd left them, completely undamaged. I could hear both engines still running normally, as if nothing had happened. "We need to keep moving," I said, scanning the tree line on both sides of the road. "Those things from the woods are still out there." Emily straightened up, pushing her hair out of her face. "Things? You keep saying things, but I haven't seen anything except..." She gestured toward the crossing where the train had disappeared. Except whatever that was. Before I could answer, I heard the familiar sound of branches snapping somewhere in the forest to our left. Not the coordinated crashing from before, but something moving more carefully through the undergrowth. Stalking rather than chasing. "This way," I said, leading Emily off the road toward a break in the trees. We pushed through a gap between two large oaks and found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. At the far edge stood a house I recognized immediately, even in the darkness. The Henderson place had been abandoned for 15 years, but someone still maintained the bright red paint that covered every exterior surface. The color was so vivid it seemed to glow in the moonlight, marking it clearly as one of the 3 houses everyone in town knew to avoid. Emily moved toward the house without hesitation. "Finally, maybe we can use their phone to call for help." I caught her arm before she could take another step. "Emily, no, that's one of the red houses I told you about." She turned to stare at me, her expression shifting from relief to exasperation. "Are you serious? After everything that just happened, you're still worried about some local superstition?" The snapping branches grew closer, coming from multiple directions now. Whatever had been hunting us had found our trail and was closing in on the clearing. I could hear movement to our left, then our right, as if multiple creatures were positioning themselves around the perimeter. Then I heard something else that made my decision for me. A steady tapping sound was coming from inside the red house, rhythmic and deliberate. It seemed to originate from somewhere toward the back, maybe a bedroom or kitchen. Each tap was clear and distinct, like someone knocking on wood with their knuckles. Emily heard it too. Her head tilted as she focused on the sound. Someone's in there. I remembered the fourth rule I'd told her earlier, the one about following tapping sounds from houses. It was one of the few rules that sometimes required you to break the others, and right now we were caught between multiple violations anyway. The red house was forbidden, but the tapping was a signal that trumped almost everything else. The sounds from the forest grew louder, branches breaking and leaves rustling as our pursuers moved closer to the clearing. We had maybe a minute before they reached us, and nowhere else to run. The phantom train had cut off our retreat to the vehicles, and the dense trees blocked any other escape routes. Emily looked between the approaching sounds and the red house, her face tight with fear and confusion. "Dave, what's happening here? The train went right through our cars. Those sounds in the woods, now this house. Nothing makes sense." The tapping from inside the house grew more insistent, faster, and more urgent. It was definitely coming from the back of the building, and it was definitely meant to get our attention. Every instinct screamed at me to run from the red house, but the creatures in the woods left us no choice. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the front door. Sometimes you have to break the rules to survive them. The door was unlocked, just like I'd expected it would be. Red houses always left themselves open when the tapping started. As we stepped across the threshold, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees, and I felt the familiar wrongness that came with entering a place that existed outside normal reality. Emily shivered beside me, still gripping my hand. Behind us, the sounds from the forest reached the edge of the clearing, then stopped completely. Whatever had been hunting us knew better than to approach a red house when it was active. The tapping continued from deeper inside, steady and patient, waiting for us to follow. The floorboards creaked under our feet as we moved deeper into the house, each step echoing in ways that didn't quite match the sound they should have made. Emily's grip on my hand tightened as we passed through what had once been a living room. Furniture covered in white sheets that looked gray in the moonlight filtering through dirty windows. I kept us moving down a narrow hallway lined with family photos that were too dark to make out clearly. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips that hung like dead skin, and the carpet beneath our feet felt damp despite the house being abandoned for over a decade. Every instinct I had developed over years of living with this town's rules was screaming at me to turn around and run, but the sounds from the forest had stopped completely once we crossed the threshold. Whatever had been hunting us knew better than to follow us inside. The hallway ended at a bedroom door that stood slightly open. The tapping was coming from just beyond it, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Emily hesitated when we reached the doorway, her free hand reaching toward the frame. "I can't believe we're doing this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, keeping Emily behind me. The bedroom was smaller than I'd expected, with a single window that looked out toward the forest, and a bed positioned directly in the center of the room. On top of the faded quilt sat an old wooden box, maybe 8 inches square, tapping itself against the bed frame with mechanical precision. The box looked handmade, crafted from dark wood that had been polished to a dull shine. Each tap was deliberate and measured, creating the sound we'd been following. As we approached, the tapping slowed, then stopped completely, as if the box had accomplished its purpose. Emily released my hand and took a step closer to the bed. "What is that thing?" I'd seen something similar before, 3 years ago when my brother Marcus had gone missing. The morning after he disappeared, I'd found a wooden box sitting on my kitchen table, tapping the same rhythm against a coffee mug. Inside had been his motorcycle keys and a note that simply read, "Too fast." I'd thrown both the keys and the note in the trash, but they'd appeared again the next day, and the day after that, until I finally understood they weren't going away. "It's a gift," I said, moving around to the other side of the bed. "The red houses sometimes leave them for people who end up inside." "A gift?" Emily's voice cracked slightly. "From who?" I reached for the box before I could talk myself out of it. The wood felt warm under my fingers, warmer than anything should have been in this cold house. The lid was held shut by a simple brass clasp that opened easily when I pressed it. Inside, nestled in red velvet that looked too new for such an old box, lay a brass key and a folded piece of paper. The key was old-fashioned, the kind that might have unlocked doors or chests from 50 years ago. The paper felt heavy and expensive, like the kind used for important documents. I unfolded the note carefully. Written in neat black ink were the words, "The stream runs both ways. Dawn brings the choice." Emily leaned over my shoulder to read it. "What stream? What choice? Dave, you need to tell me what's happening here." Before I could answer, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Voices were calling from outside the house, drifting through the walls from multiple directions. But these weren't the growling or roaring sounds I'd expected from whatever had been chasing us through the forest. They were our voices. "Emily?" called a voice that sounded exactly like me, coming from somewhere near the front of the house. "Emily, where are you? It's safe to come out now." "Dave?" answered another voice that was a perfect match for Emily's, originating from what sounded like the backyard. "Dave, I found a way out. Come outside, I'll show you." Emily grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my jacket sleeve. "That's impossible. How are they—" "David!" The fake Emily voice called again, closer this time, maybe right outside the bedroom window. "I'm scared. Please come help me." I closed the wooden box and shoved it into my jacket pocket, then grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her away from the window. The voices continued calling, sometimes using our names, sometimes just making conversational sounds like we were having a normal discussion just out of hearing range. They moved around the house in patterns that didn't match any human walking pace, too fluid and coordinated. "Those aren't really us," I said, leading Emily back toward the hallway. "Don't listen to them. Don't look outside." "Emily, please," came my voice again, this time from what sounded like directly below the window. "I need your help. Something's wrong with Dave." Emily's face had gone completely white. She pressed both hands over her ears, but I could tell she was still hearing the voices clearly. The sounds were coming from inside the house now, not just outside. They'd found a way to project directly into the rooms, bypassing the walls and windows entirely. I pulled Emily further back from the window, but the voices followed us down the hallway, seeming to come from the walls themselves now. The fake conversation continued, my voice and Emily's voice having a discussion about finding a safe place to hide, discussing escape routes that led directly into the most dangerous parts of town. "Dave, the truck is fine," the thing wearing my voice said, now coming from what sounded like the living room. "We can drive straight through to Maple Street. No problems at all." "That sounds perfect," the Emily voice responded from somewhere near the kitchen. "I don't know why we were so worried before." Emily kept her hands pressed over her ears, but I could see her fighting the urge to respond. The voices were designed to draw us out, to make us think rescue was just a conversation away. I'd heard stories about people who'd followed those fake voices right into the forest, never to be seen again. I pulled the wooden box from my jacket pocket and opened it again, studying the brass key and the note in the dim light filtering through the hallway. "The stream runs both ways. Dawn brings the choice." My mind worked through what I knew about the town's geography, about the rules I'd learned over years of watching people disappear, the stream north of town, the one I'd specifically warned Emily to stay away from. But the note wasn't warning us about the stream. It was telling us how to use it. "Emily," I said quietly, keeping my voice low enough that the fake voices couldn't mimic it immediately. "I think I know what this means." She lowered her hand slightly, looking at the key in my palm. "The gift? It's showing us a way out. The stream north of town. There must be something there we can use." I closed the box and slipped it back into my pocket. "But we have to wait until dawn." "Why dawn?" Before I could answer, the voices outside shifted, becoming more desperate and angry. But worse than that, they weren't just our voices anymore. "Davy?" came a new voice from the front yard, one that made my chest tighten. "Davy, it's Marcus. I'm okay, little brother. Come outside and I'll explain everything. Emily saw my face change and grabbed my arm. Who's Marcus? My brother, I said, my throat suddenly dry. He died 3 years ago. The Marcus voice continued, now joined by others I recognized from town. Mrs. Chen, who'd disappeared 2 summers ago when she'd walked too close to the stream during a fishing trip. Tommy Rodriguez, who'd ignored the rule about the train tracks and vanished the same night his car was found abandoned at the crossing. David, please, Mrs. Chen's voice called from the backyard. We've been waiting for you. We know the way out. It's easy, Tommy added from somewhere near the side of the house. Just follow our voices. We'll show you the safe path. Emily was staring at me with wide eyes. Those are all people who disappeared? I nodded, trying to block out the familiar voices that pulled at something deep in my chest. The part of me that missed Marcus, that wanted to believe he was really out there waiting for me. But I'd learned years ago that wanting something and having it be true were 2 different things entirely. They use the voices of people we've lost, I explained. It makes it harder to resist following them. We spent the next few hours moving through the house, staying away from windows and doors while the voices outside grew more frantic. Sometimes they pleaded, sometimes they threatened, and sometimes they just talked among themselves, having conversations about normal things like they were old friends catching up. The worst part was how real they sounded, how much they captured the speech patterns and personalities of people I'd known. Emily and I found a spot in what had been the dining room, sitting on the floor with our backs against an interior wall where we couldn't see outside. She'd stopped asking questions and just listened, her face getting paler each time a new voice joined the chorus. Around 4 in the morning, the voices began to fade, becoming more distant and less frequent. By the time the first pale light started showing through the dirty windows, they'd stopped completely. The house felt empty again, like it had when we'd first entered. Is it over? Emily asked. I checked my watch. 5:30. Dawn was close enough. Time to go. We left through the back door, stepping into the cool morning air that felt clean after spending hours in the stale atmosphere of the red house. The forest around us was quiet except for normal bird sounds and the distant rustle of small animals moving through the undergrowth. I led Emily north through the trees, following a path I'd known about since childhood, but had never used. The note had said, "Dawn brings the choice," and I was betting that choice was at the stream. After 20 minutes of walking through increasingly dense forest, I heard the sound of moving water ahead. The stream was wider than I'd expected, maybe 15 feet across, with clear water flowing steadily over smooth stones. But what caught my attention was the dock hidden behind a cluster of overhanging willows. Old wooden planks that looked like they'd been there for decades, gray and weathered but still solid. Chained to the dock was a small rowboat, maybe big enough for 2 people. The chain was secured with an old brass lock that looked exactly like it would match the key in my pocket. "You've got to be kidding," Emily said, but her voice held relief instead of disbelief. After everything we'd seen, a hidden boat secured with a matching key was actually the most logical thing that had happened all night. I pulled the brass key from my pocket and tried it in the lock. It turned easily, and the chain fell away into the water with a soft splash. The boat was in better condition than it had any right to be, with fresh-looking wooden seats and oars that felt sturdy when I tested them. "Get in," I said, holding the boat steady while Emily climbed aboard. I pushed us off from the dock and settled onto the rear seat, fitting the oars into their locks. The current caught us immediately, pulling us downstream at a pace that felt controlled and deliberate. Behind us, the trees closed over the dock until I couldn't see where we'd launched from. Emily sat facing me, watching the forest slide past on both sides of the stream. "Are we safe now?" I pulled the note from my pocket and read it again in the growing daylight. "The stream runs both ways. Dawn brings the choice." The words made more sense now, but not in the way I'd first hoped. "We're not escaping," I said, folding the paper carefully. We're being allowed to leave. What's the difference? I watched my hometown disappear behind the trees, thinking about everything that had happened. We'd followed the speed limit until survival required breaking it. We'd avoided the red house until the tapping told us to enter. We'd stayed away from the stream until it became our only option. The town has rules, I said, but it also has exceptions. We proved we could follow the rules even when breaking them was necessary. That's why we get to leave safely. The stream carried us through forest I'd never seen before, past clearings and rock formations that looked untouched by human presence. But I knew we weren't heading towards some distant city or highway. We were being carried to a place where we could safely exit the town's influence, probably a road or intersection where normal rules applied again. Emily leaned back against the front of the boat, letting her hand trail in the water. Will we be able to come back? I looked at the note one more time, then at the forest surrounding us. Somewhere behind those trees, the town was still there, still protecting people who understood its rules and still taking those who didn't. The red houses would be quiet again until they were needed. The phantom train would run its route. The creatures in the forest would hunt those who drove too fast. The stream runs both ways, I said. The town will always be there, waiting for our return, with its rules intact and its protection available to those who understand them. Emily nodded, seeming to accept this as just another part of a reality that had shifted completely in the span of one night. As the boat continued downstream, I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted to come back or not, but I was grateful that the choice would be mine to make.